Hello and welcome into this week's Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series Rewind show right here on Racing News Now. As always, I'm your host, Garth Allen. Thank you once again for joining me today. If this is your first time catching a Racing News Now video, consider going down below to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss a thing going forward from R&N. On today's Cup Rewind, we are looking back at Sunday night's second annual South Point 400. 267 laps, 400.5 miles around the 1.5 mile Las Vegas Motor Speedway, Las Vegas, Nevada. And I gotta say, I was fairly disappointed in this race, to be completely honest with you. We had gotten to the point this season where it looked like this package was actually really good with night races, and we didn't get much happening in this one outside of restarts, which that's kind of been the thing with this package, especially during day races, is restarts are good, but you get about 5 laps outside of a restart and it looks exactly the same as it did before. So it wasn't the worst race of the season, but it wasn't the best race of the season. It was one of those that we probably really won't remember for a while into the future. Nothing all that drastic happened in the playoff world. Other than Kurt Busch getting caught up in an accident in the middle of the race, but he's still fairly safe for the moment in the playoffs. Eric Jones may have been the worst one hit in this race, and we'll get to that in a moment. Not a great race for Eric Jones, but otherwise, not a lot of storylines happening in this race, not a lot of excitement happening, just, I don't know, not a lot happening here, period. 4 caution flags for a total of 22 laps. Nothing of note in Stage 1 caution flag-wise. That ended at lap 80 with Joey Logano taking the Stage 1 victory. Logano dominated the early portions of this race. Stage 2 concluded at lap 160. No other cautions in Stage 2 either. Martin Truex Jr. takes the Stage 2 victory. 2 cautions for incidents in the final stage. First one at lap 180 as the 24 of William Byron spins in turn 4. Final caution of the night came at lap 187 as the 1 of Kurt Busch wrecked in turn 3. Those are your only cautions on the night, only incidents to really happen. Did have a decent amount of lead changes in this race, though. 24 lead changes among 14 drivers. Again, a lot of those happening, though, right after a restart. So again, you get some decent racing for a few laps after a restart, and then everybody just kind of spreads out, and it looks like a typical mile-and-a-half race has for years now. So, most laps led went to Joey Logano, 105 laps into the 22 car. 47 laps led by Kevin Harvick. 32 laps went to Martin Truex. 29 laps were led by Daniel Suarez. 16 laps led by Michael McDowell. 12 laps were led by Chase Elliott. 9 laps went to Matt DiBenedetto. 6 laps led by William Byron. 3 laps apiece went to Eric Almirola and Denny Hamlin. 2 laps led by Kyle Larson. And 1 lap apiece went to Ryan Blaney, Chris Buescher, and Clint Bowyer. Alright, so let's get into your results for this race. Joey Logano led the most laps, 105, and won the first stage. Martin Truex won Stage 2 as well as leading 32 laps. A good handful of laps went to Kevin Harvick as well as Daniel Suarez. Who would come out on top in the South Point 400? And it would be Martin Truex Jr. taking his 5th win of the season. 24th of his career. A good drive here out of Truex at the end of this race. Had a decent battle with Kevin Harvick off of late pit stops. But again, it wasn't a fantastic battle. There wasn't a lot to it. And it was settled fairly early on in the final run. And Truex just kind of ran away with it at the end of the race. Does, though, lock himself into the next round of the playoffs. I think that's the most significant point to make here is Truex is locked into the second round of the playoffs this year, the round of 12. Kevin Harvick came home in the second position, Brad Keselowski in third, Chase Elliott fourth, and Ryan Blaney rounded out the top 5. Rest of your top 10, really cool paint scheme for Alex Bowman this week. I want to give a shout out to that. It was nationwide on the car this week, but they had a lot of black mixed into the paint scheme. Not even sure what you actually call that paint scheme, if it had an official name. The rundown here just calls it the Nationwide Chevy. So I don't know if there was really an official name for the paint scheme, but I thought that scheme looked really clean. It was nice. William Byron came home in 7th, Kyle Larson 8th, Joey Logano 9th, and Ryan Newman with a strong top 10 run in 10th. He was up very high late in this race. I think he was as high as 3rd at one point. So a good run out of Newman, I think surprising a lot of us. And if he keeps that up, may sneak his way into the round of 12, just like he snuck his way into the playoffs. But also of note, the entire top 10 were playoff drivers. So these guys that aren't in the top 10, that are in the playoffs, the other 6 drivers that are in the playoffs, not doing them any favors when 10 of their competition are all in the top 10. 11th through 20th, Jimmy Johnson there in the 11th position. Eric Almirola landed in 13th. He had a strong car early on and then kind of faded throughout the middle portion of the race. Denny Hamlin in 15th. He's been so strong this season. An uncharacteristically off night for that 11 car. And Kyle Busch just had all kinds of things happening on this night. Got in the wall early, then had a scuffle with some lapped cars at the end of the race. And then probably the most colorful thing happening on the night was Kyle's post-race interview and his Twitter after the race, complaining about guys in the back that can't even win a late model race. So take that as you will, but that may have been the most entertaining portion of the night, unfortunately. Daniel Suarez back here in the 20th position after starting on the outside of the front row. 21st through 30th, got one playoff driver on this page, and it is Clint Bowyer, who started on the pole. Ends up one lap down in the 25th position after leading one lap. That was the initial start of the race, that first lap, and then just kind of continued to fade from there, unfortunately. Not a good start to the playoffs for that 14 car. Final page, 31st through 39th. Couple of playoff names back here as well. Mentioned Eric Jones. He had issues there in the mid-portion of the race, and unfortunately ended the race 13 laps down in that 36th position. Digs himself a bit of a hole here to start off the round, as we'll see when we get to the playoff grid. He's got a bit of a hole to dig out of now on the playoff grid. And then Kurt Busch back here, shotgun on the field in 39th after his accident. Loses a bit of a gap that he had, but not in a terrible position at this point. Definitely not in as bad of a position as Eric Jones is in after this race. All right, so that's your results from the South Point 400. So let's head over to the Media Center, and we will see what Martin and his team had to say after their 5th win of the season.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah, I mean, you never know what can happen. You can go and think you're going to run well, and something bad happens. The 20 was just pitted next to us, and they had a good car, and something weird happened, and all of a sudden you have a bad day. So yeah, winning and not having to worry about that's huge. But Richmond, Roval, they're 2 really good tracks for us. So we're kind of going on the approach of keep our foot on the gas, and hopefully we can rack up some more playoff points at those 2 places.
Yeah, our sport is very different in that you got to have 4 teams work together to really gain knowledge, what happens at the racetrack, make the right calls, and the right adjustments. And to show you how hard our sport is, last week we had all 4 cars had issues. We have 4 cars, they all had issues. This week we had 3 of them. And it shows you how hard our sport is. It's hats off and a real compliment to Cole and what he was able to keep the 19 up there, he and Martin. And also, we had great pit stops at the end. It was a total team effort. I think what the last 2 weeks for us just highlights how hard our sport is. And it's hard, and yeah, it is hard. Our meeting tomorrow, our technical meeting will be tough because 3 of them, had a real tough day. But I think what you need to do is try and figure out, okay, what happened? How do you keep it from happening again? and learn from those tough nights. And so many different things could happen to you in motorsports.
Well, I think it's huge. I think it's huge for a lot of reasons. First off, we've had a stretch of 6 or 7 races, maybe 6, that we've been really strong in, and we feel like we've had cars capable of winning, and we honestly don't have a whole lot to show for it. We had no bonus points in that stretch, and it was getting frustrating. But we knew we were really fast, and we knew we were working on the right things, and I knew the team was doing a great job. So it's kind of like for us inside of our own minds, it's kind of it's kind of indication that, hey, we were doing the right things. We are doing the right things. And, when we can get things to roll our way and not make any mistakes, this is what we can do. So great timing, obviously, with the playoffs starting to be able to do it. And, I think a lot of people have been like, hey, where's the 19 been? We don't expect them to be that strong. And we know we can. We know what we can do. So when we live up to our potential, it makes us all happy. And I know everybody that makes this happen, Coach and Johnny and Jeff and all the men and women back at the shop, they've seen this. They knew what we were capable of. So that, for me, that just feels good to be able to do the job we're here to do. And, hopefully we can carry this momentum on. Most importantly, the playoff points are huge. We got 6 tonight, and we got 2 more weeks to try to get some more with no consequences.
All right, so let's take a look at your playoff grid before wrapping up here tonight. One race into the first round of the playoffs, and it definitely has been shaken up a little bit here. Obviously, Truex's name in green now as he is advanced to the round of 12. Got a lot of guys here that I think are fairly safe on points. I would say everybody from about 7th on up, Harvick, Logano, Kyle Busch, Keselowski, Elliott, Denny Hamlin. I think they're all pretty safe into the next round at this point on points. Obviously, they can't afford to have 2 terribly bad races over the next couple of weeks, but I think as long as they have fairly solid weeks, they don't even have to have great races. But with the gaps that they are all currently sitting at, I think they're fairly safe. Nothing set in stone except for Martin Truex at this point, but I think the rest of these guys in the top 7 are pretty safe. You get down here to Kyle Larson in 8th, 17 points to the good. I mean, that's a pretty good number. He can be sleeping pretty well going into next week at Richmond, but definitely not a huge cushion there to play with. One bad race here in the next couple of weeks, and all of a sudden he really doesn't have anything to play with here. All the way down here, the 4 guys currently out or underneath the cut line right now, 13th through 16th. Ryan Newman sits 6 points out. Kurt Busch back here, 14 points back in the 14th position. 21 points back here in 15th is Clint Bowyer. And then Eric Jones back here in the 16th position. He's the one I think we're really worried about at this point. 26 points back in that 16th position after his bad race here in Vegas. I think he's the one to really be worried about here. But Clint Bowyer not in a great spot either. He didn't start out with the greatest amount of points to start this round, and this race finishing 25th did not help him in any way. Started off real well, started from the pole, his first pole since 2007. So it looked like it was going to be a good weekend for that 14 car, and it just didn't pan out. And unfortunately finds himself behind the 8 ball here. Kurt Busch, like we said, after that accident, does find himself below the cutoff line, but is not in a terrible position. 14 points can be made up in 2 races. Can it easily be made up? No, but it can be made up. I mean, you look here above the cutoff line, you got guys like Eric Almirola, Alex Bowman, Ryan Blaney, William Byron. While they're all definitely playoff caliber drivers, I think they're all definitely drivers that Kurt can outpoint in the next couple of races, depending on how these races go. I think once you get below Kurt, though, I think when you start looking at Clint Bowyer and Eric Jones, they're almost already in a must-win situation. Not quite yet, I don't think. But I think if we get through Richmond and Bowyer and Jones are still a decent amount below that cutoff line, that's when I think we're definitely in a must-win situation for them. I don't know that we're necessarily in a must-win yet. We'll see what they do at Richmond, but not a good position for a couple of these guys. But that's your playoff grid following the South Point 400 at Las Vegas, and I believe that'll do it for us on this Cup Series Rewind. We did have an ARCA Rewind go up last night, covering their race from Salem on Saturday night, so go check that out if you haven't already. And, of course, post-race interviews from the top 5 finishers at Salem, as well as, of course, we were at Salem, as we are with most ARCA races, so go check those out if you haven't already. Great chats with Ty Gibbs, Christian Eckes, Corey Heim, Brett Holmes, and Sam Mayer. So, again, go check those out if you haven't already. Diecast review coming up on Wednesday, the final 2018 Cup car. It's not a raced version. It's not a clean version. Well, I guess technically it's a clean version, but it's not a standard finish, if that kind of gives you maybe a little bit of hint as to what we're doing on Wednesday. A special look at a final Cup Series car for 2018 before we get into 2019 raced versions. And then podcast should be starting up here on Wednesday, a new podcast here on Racing News Now. We'll have more details on that coming up here in the coming days, but not your typical NASCAR podcast. It will seem somewhat similar to a typical NASCAR podcast, but it will also stray from that a little bit as well. I think it's a fun type of podcast, and hopefully you will find it fun as well. When that debuts on Wednesday, we'll have a new face here on Racing News Now for that podcast as well. So keep an eye out for that. Coming up should be on Wednesday. I think we're planning on recording that today on Monday. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, got lots of stuff coming up next weekend as well. Lots of on-track activity that we will definitely be keeping you up to date on as well, both here and on Twitter. But if you haven't done it already, you need to go down below, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss a thing going forward from RNN. While you're down there, why don't you hit that big thumbs up button if you like the video. It is much appreciated when you do. But at that, this has been the Monster Energy NASCAR Cup Series Rewind Show. I'm Garth Allen for Racing News Now.